Hello, Lander fans, and welcome back to the Stasis Podcast, the show where we give you the inside scoop on each crew member in the game of Lander. I'm your host, Sean Lemon from Intrepid Games. Today we'll be continuing our exploration with a look at the colony's Chief of Science. Initially from Australia, but now a founding member of the Chimus 2 colony, let's give it up for Alicia Bailey. As you can see, Alicia has a science class level of 5, which is the highest starting value a crew member can have in the game. Her personality traits are resilient and resourceful. When Alicia is your leader, once per year as an anytime order, you can discard one activity card to prevent a leadership ability from being used for the year, or an action card from being played. Because this is an anytime ability, you can use it at literally any point in the game, even when it's not your turn. Just make sure to mark that you've used it by placing one of your pieces in the triangle icon on her card. It's worth noting that this ability is different from the card included in the preview copies we've sent out to our Play Before You Pledge partners and reviewers. This change is just one example of how the feedback we've received from players around the world is being used to make the final version of the game even better. You can also see that Alicia is playable in all 3 game modes: Basic Simulation, Early Arrival, and Planned Arrival. Now let's show some examples of what makes her an interesting leader.
So Alicia really highlights one of the key themes in Lander, and that is choice. You're going to have a lot of choices to make, and it's what you choose and when you choose it that'll ultimately determine how successful you are. So as I mentioned previously, Alicia gives you 2 options as a leader. As an anytime order, once per year, you can either prevent a leadership ability from being used, or you can prevent an action card from being played. So I'm going to walk through both of these one by one. So first on the leadership side. In Lander there's 50 crew members, and each crew member has a unique leadership ability, so it's just this text down here. But their ability is only active when they occupy a leader slot, so the first slot on your crew roster is the leader slot. So those crew members' abilities are active, no one else's is. Now, it's possible to get a second leader in the game if you happen to draw one of these leadership training cards. You can attach it to another crew member like this, and that'll activate their leadership ability. So it's possible you could have 2 leaders in play at once. You're only allowed 1 of these per crew, so you'll never have more than 2. So if you're playing a 4-player game, you're going to be seeing 3 to 6 other leaders outside of your crew. Now, I know it's a bit hard to understand the value of stopping a leadership ability without knowing all the different unique abilities. That's kind of why we're doing this segment, so you can get some exposure to the different abilities in the game. But yeah, with Alicia, it may take 1 or 2 plays before you really start to see, oh, I could use her to stop him or her. But we'll give a few examples here quickly. So there's 2 types of leadership abilities in the game. There's passive abilities. So Pablo here boosts all your items by 2. That's a passive ability. You don't need to use an official order to activate that. It's just always active when he's your leader. And Nohemi here is an example of an active leadership ability. So once per year, draw any 2 resources from colony stores. So you would have to use an official order, and you'd say, oh, I'm going to use Nohemi, and I'm going to draw 2 food, for example. And just like Alicia, after using her, you'd put a piece on there to show that she'd been used for the year. Now, Alicia can block both kinds of leadership abilities, but they have different implications. So with Pablo, if you wanted to block him, it might make sense to block him right at the start of the year, because then that player wouldn't have access to him for the whole year. So that's basically maximizing the impact you're having. On the other hand, you might say, maybe I'll wait, let this person have the illusion that they're going to have access to his ability, and then right when you think they're trying to do a mission or play a card, then you can pop up and say, nope, I'm using Alicia, I'm discarding, an activity card, and now you can't use Pablo. And that's potentially more devastating because they may have planned something and were banking on his ability being active. So that's part of Lander, is knowing when to do things, because you may want to just try to maximize the effect by doing it at the start of the year, but then that player will have the whole year to pivot around what you've done. And we use this word pivot a lot in Lander because it's really what the game is. A lot of things are going to come at you sideways, and it's all about how do you adapt your strategy in the moment. So if you're hit right at the start of the year, you have more time to make that adaptation because you have resources, you have cards, you have time. if someone hits you right at the end of the year and you don't have much in your hand, it's going to be more of a critical hit. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is if you're using Alicia to stop an active leadership ability, you don't have to state it at the beginning of the year. You can literally wait until that person is trying to do it, and then you can stop it with Alicia. And that applies even if you've prepared for your end. So let's say you didn't have anything else you wanted to do, you moved your marker, you can't see it because I'm off camera, but if you moved it into the prepare for your end triangle there, you wouldn't be in the year anymore. But because her leadership ability is in any time order, it means they could be trying to use Nohemi. That's their last move in the year. When they're out of resources, they need 2 more. They could go to use her, and you could say, nope, even though I'm out of the year, I can still discard a card and stop you. So she's really powerful, and really I would wait to use her until you felt like you absolutely had to. I wouldn't rush and do it at the start of the year unless there was a leader giving that player a lot of resources. Maybe it's early in the game. You don't want them to kind of run away on that exponential resource curve. Then maybe I would stop them just to kind of stop the bleeding. But once you get mid or late game, then I would probably hold that back strategically. And oftentimes you'll find that it's the threat of something in Lander that's worse than the actual ability. So, because again, there could be multiple players in the game, so they won't know who you're planning to use her ability on. So by holding it back, you're affecting more players because everyone's a little worried. She hasn't been used yet, maybe he'll use her to stop me. So that keeps it interesting. The second part of Alicia's ability is the option of preventing an action card from being played. So in essence, she is a human shield, a human block action. So by discarding an activity card from her hand, she can basically do what this shielding card does and just stop an action dead in its tracks from happening. And that's because she's the chief of science and she makes the rules. In order to understand the value of that, you need to understand that there's 100 action cards in the game and they do a variety of things. They can either help a corporation, so we've got cards like giving you a free upgrade, a free expansion, drawing free resources from the colony stores, maybe replacing a mission if you get stuck, all really beneficial things. But then they can also do some more aggressive, kind of take that type of things, like taking a sector, stealing resources from another player, poisoning their soup, stealing items. So kind of, an array of actions there. So when you're thinking of preventing an action with Alicia, you're kind of making the decision, am I going to be defensive and use her to protect me from bad things? Or am I going to go on the offensive and try to disrupt an opponent's strategy? And there's arguments to be made for both. It really varies on the situation, which makes the most sense. The other interesting aspect of using Alicia to block action cards is that there's going to be a lot in the game. So at the start of each year, each corporation will draw 2 new action cards, and then during the year they can buy additional ones by paying 2 energy. So it's not uncommon during a year for each player to have 3, 4, 5 or more action cards in their hands. So using Alicia to only block 1 action in a year is a bit tricky, right? It's hard to know if this is the one to block or if I should hold out for potentially blocking a stronger card or one that will have more impact on your opponents. One way to help you kind of make that decision is to know that action cards, in order to play them, you have to meet certain criteria. And typically, the more powerful the card, the higher the criteria you need to meet. So on this Kill Crew card, you need 7 science on 1 single crew member. So if you're looking, and let's say Aspire here had a few action cards in your hand, you're Westcott Benton with Alicia, you're worried about what they might play, you can look at their crew and say, well, they don't have any operations, they don't have any class over 5, so I know that the most powerful cards, the take sectors, the kill crew, some of the more disruptive ones in the game, they're not going to be able to play. So you can kind of take the edge off when you see all those cards. You're like, I'm not so worried that those are going to come at me. But maybe someone else has a much more developed crew in action cards, and then I would kind of be looking at them thinking, I might be using my ability to protect myself against you. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is the element of kind of reading your opponents and bluffing that really comes in. So let's say your opponent decides to play a card where they may try to steal an item. Let's say you had a 2 science item, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to take that 2 science. You might be like, how good is that? I don't know, I've already got a lot of science. Do I really need 2 more? And you'd have to make a choice if you're going to use her ability to stop that. In that particular example, I'd probably let it go. But that might be because I've played against a lot of Lander pros, and this is a common technique they'll use. They'll throw out a semi-powerful card to try to bait you into using the ability, or to bait you into using a shielding card. And then after you've blocked it, on their next turn they come back with the real card they wanted to play, whether it's a kill card or a take sector or something like that. So with Alicia, it's important to read the opponents in the game, read your opponents. Don't just block the first thing they play. They may be trying to set you up. And one nice little trick that I've found is that when I have Alicia, I like to, if I can, get my hands on a block action, or even better, a counter action card. Hold that in my hand. Then if someone plays that steal item card, I'll block it. I'll use her ability. Then they think I'm vulnerable. They come at me, and then I hit them with the counter action or the other block action, and that really throws them off. So there's kind of this game within the game, kind of like poker, where you're reading your opponent, trying to figure out what they have and what they're trying to do, and where possible trying to mislead the other players. So yeah, Alicia's a good example of that. In terms of my strategy with Alicia, it's a tough one to know when to use her to prevent actions and when to prevent leadership abilities. I think it's very situational, so it's kind of hard to make any kind of broad-based suggestions, but I think at a high level in the early years, I would use her to stop either a leadership ability or an action card that was giving resources. So if someone had no Hemi, or let's say they were using like a free resources card, then I would probably use her to block one of those, because resources at the beginning of the game kind of get you up that exponential curve of resource growth quicker, and that can be problematic. So I would probably use her in that way early game. Then as I shift into mid or late game, I'm going to start using her in a defensive way. So I'm not going to rush out and just block the first action card that comes my way. I'm going to really think about it and use her to safeguard my crew, safeguard my hand, so that I can do the missions I need and get the stars that I'm planning. Given all this, it's also important to remember you do have to discard a card to play her ability. There is a cost. So I'm also going to try to make sure I always have kind of one dud card in my hand that I'm not afraid to throw away to use her. I'm not going to keep a bunch of good cards or just consistently consolidate activities, because then I'm going to be forced with a tough choice of, do I throw away this trait I need for a mission, or do I block this potentially devastating leadership ability or action card? So to help get yourself out of those jams, it's good to just keep a spare item, training, action card, whatever it is. Keep one around. Just kind of earmark it as like, that's my Alicia card. If I need her, it's there. One last point of clarification with Alicia. If you have used her to prevent another leader from being used that year, and then she dies, then that prevent leadership ability goes away. So she'd block Nohemi from getting resources, and then Aspire kills her. Then Nohemi's alive and well again. She can take her resources. So another reason why you want to get that Medipack and stick it on Alicia to keep her alive during the year.
This concludes today's episode of the Stasis Podcast. If you want to learn more about the other crew members in the game, then we encourage you to subscribe to our channel so you can get notified as soon as the next episode goes live. In case you haven't heard, Lander will be launching on Kickstarter March 3rd, 2020. We sent over 130 demo copies to shops and cafes around the world. So if you want to put some of the strategies we've discussed today into play, then we encourage you and your friends to go into your local venue and literally play before you pledge. See you next time.